start off just to encourage you guys. You guys are part of the 3% that Pastor Jeff was talking about. You know, when you look at someone like me, and I want you to understand that I was fully indoctrinated by a medical system that makes us believe that science is done and science has been proven and science is not to be questioned. That was me. And when I was asked to sponsor a bill you may have heard of, HB 248, I was like, hey, you know, I believe that everybody ought to get their shots, but I believe in liberty more than anything. And what I want you to know is when you look at me, I was a vaccine zealot. How else would I have been part of Warp Speed? If you are part of Warp Speed, that means you believe in all the vaccines, you believe in everything you've been told, and you're going to be part of the solution of a virus that will say maybe didn't happen naturally. So when someone like me changes, what I want you guys to know is this. There were little seeds planted. I had the nuclear scientist at church who's like, pharma's bad. I'm like, I used to sell Prozac, okay, whatever. And then I have the one study that I'm reading where a doctor did a 1 CE on Gardasil, and the girl who got Gardasil was gifted, and then she got Gardasil, and now she's special needs. And I'm like, And if Stephanie had given me the book, Dissolving Illusions, 5 years ago, I would have quietly shoved it under the desk and maybe donated it to Goodwill. It was ironic when I found this book, and I'm like, I found this book, Stephanie, and she's like, oh. And she sends me this picture. I'm like, why does she send me a picture? She's like, that's the author. I know it. And Dr. Humphreys, if you haven't watched a recent podcast with Joe Rogan, it's fascinating. I listened to it all the way up here today. But what I want to encourage you is that 5 years ago, I was a vaccine zealot who did not question. And because of like Pastor Jeff, and thank you to all of you, Pastor Jeff, thank you for your kindness for hosting today, and for all of OAMF for sponsoring this. I was like a Moses. You know, I was fussing at the Lord, like, why do I have to carry this bill? And what is it? And you know, I felt like God said to me, you know, Jennifer, you know, Moses wasn't perfect, and guys, neither am I. Moses stuttered. Moses struck the rock twice. God told him to strike it once. He was disobedient. I am not a perfect vessel, but I'll tell you what the Lord said. All I asked of you was to be obedient. You don't get to determine the outcome of these bills, and you don't get to determine what happens, but you have to obey me. And the perfect place in the center of God's will is obedience to Him, because to obey is better than sacrifice. So having said that, I just have to thank you, because the last seed that was planted was the Goldens, whose daughter Haley died of a meningitis vaccine, and all the people that I've worked with, Crystal and the goals and all of that, all that I've learned has only built me into who I am today. And I still struggle reading the science and knowing all of that, but what I want you to know is, above all else, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And that is what drives me as a legislator, and that's what drives me to keep standing again, being beaten up again and again. So let's talk about two bills that Representative Swearingen and I, first HB 12, which was HB 73 last year, called the Jeff, Dave, and Angie Patient Right to Try Act. First, it safeguards I'm going to read off my notes, otherwise we will be here for 3 hours. It safeguards the consenting patient's ability to obtain a prescribed medication from their healthcare provider without interference from a pharmacist, provided there is no life-threatening contraindications with the drug or moral objections from the pharmacist. This applies to outpatient pharmacies, hospitals, and nursing homes. It prevents pharmacies and hospitals and nursing homes from refusing to dispense a medication to a consenting patient on a scientific objection. Remember what they said about remdesivir. It was the only care, and it was the only standard of care, even though it's the only disease in the history of man where there's only one treatment, which was false, right? However, if they document their objection in the patient's record after discussing their concerns with the prescriber, they'll be protected from civil liability and administrative penalties. This balances the protection of the pharmacist and the facilities that disagree with the prescriber's drug choice while preserving the prescriber's right to treat their consenting patient. And it shields the prescribers from license-related repercussions when prescribing an off-label drug to a consenting patient. And unless the prescription involves willful, gross negligence. You'll hear people saying that this bill is going to allow doctors to have a wild, wild west, and doctors are not out to harm patients. They're not going to do things to intentionally, well, the doctors who love their patients are not going to willfully harm patients, right? It also allows us to uphold healthcare providers' freedom of speech, which was vetoed last year, and prohibit licensing boards from punishing providers or revoking their licenses for expressing opinions on the risks, benefits, or effectiveness of any drug or treatment. Physicians and providers today are guilted into telling you the status quo and what they've been detailed by pharmaceutical representatives to tell you, and I'm sure you guys all know that to be true. The second bill, HB 112, which I am so thankful, 112 is HB 12 is with Representative Swearingen. HB 112 is myself and Representative Beth Lear. It's known as the conscientious right to refuse. This bill, we need prayer, and if you know of any attorneys that are pro-medical freedom, this bill will now, this time, be in front of the Judiciary Committee. That is going to be a whole other battle that we fought in the last 4 years. So we'll be in front of a bunch of attorneys trying to defend religious liberty, which shouldn't be difficult, but we also had 1,350 witnesses for HB 248, and it didn't pass. So 112 will protect adults and emancipated minors from any form of discrimination if they choose to decline vaccines, pharmaceuticals, biologics, face masks, except those used in surgical settings, which is so we don't drop spit, right, in a surgical field, or medical devices designed to track or store medical, financial, or personal data based on their conscientious or religious beliefs. It also will ensure that children, like our sweet little Adeline in Indiana, whose parents refuse vaccines for them on a conscientious or religious ground, that they are not denied medical care or transplant services, and it permits legal action in cases where the discrimination takes place. So those are the two bills. We have others. We have food bills for the MAHA caucus. I'm a co-director of MAHA with Representative Barhorst. And I just want to thank you guys again. I want to thank you for your support. Please pray for us and don't give up. And remember that I once was a vaccine zealot, and that was only 5 years ago. And today I stand before you, arguably a very, very strong medical freedom supporter. So thank you very much.